You're listening to the Mindful Mama Podcast, episode 171. Today, we're talking about my silent retreat with myself and Oren Sofer. Welcome to the Mindful Mama Podcast. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clarke-Fields, Mindful Mama Mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course, soon to be a membership program, and I'm the author of the upcoming new book, Raising Good Humans. Welcome! I am so glad you are here today. This is a very special episode because I am having Oren Sofer back on the podcast. He was not here. He was not here that long ago is what I meant to say. He was here pretty recently in January in episode number 152, How to Talk to Kids. Very, very popular episode. I think it's maybe the number 2 most popular episode now. So if you haven't listened, check it out. But Oren has come back because I recently went on my first ever 7-day silent meditation retreat with the Insight Meditation Society. And Oren was one of the teachers. So I invited him back on the podcast to talk about that with me. So first, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Oren Sofer teaches mindfulness, meditation, and nonviolent communication in both secular and Buddhist contexts. And he's the author of the book, Say What You Mean, A Mindful Approach to Nonviolent Communication, which is a practical guidebook for having more effective, satisfying communication, which is so what we need as parents. Okay. And so he was there as my teacher when I went on this 7-day silent meditation retreat. And it was a Lovingkindness meditation retreat with the wonderful teacher Sharon Salzberg. But let me just give you the lay of the land. Like, not only was there no talking, which could be hard, right? For a podcaster, here I am just talking to you away, but also no reading, no writing, and no contact with the outside world for 7 days. So what was that like? You're gonna hear as we talk about it. And Oren talked to me about it just a few days after I came home from that retreat. So you'll learn what it was like when I cried, the benefits of the experience, and a lot more. So, I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. It was really quite a remarkable experience for me. I have been on many retreats before, but always with little kids around, or with talking. So they were never silent, and it was a whole different experience. Yes. So if you like this, I invite you to make sure you check out the mindfulmamapodcast.com page for the show notes for this episode number 171, because we're going to include images of my drawings from the retreat, and we're going to try to include images and link to the Dharma talk from the retreat. But before we dive in, I just want to let you know that I am still enrolling incredible mamas into my Mindful Mama Transformation Coaching Group. And you can find out more about that at mindfulmamamentor.com/unmartyr. And I'm very excited to let you know that during the 5 months of the group coaching, which will be August through December for this year, we're going to have an added bonus in that you will have access to the whole Mindful Parenting course during that time. So we have added this in, and we're so excited about it. It's a whole big bonus worth, about $500. So I'm so excited to share this with you. And we already have spots gone in these groups, but we have some spots available. So do you want to work with me? Do you want to learn how to become that calm, peaceful parent that you're wanting to be? Do you want to have the confidence to know what to do in those tricky situations? We learn about communication, learn about how to create relationships that are really fully satisfying, getting your needs met, and really creating a foundation. The work we do creates a foundation that makes incredible differences in people's lives. It can really be a touchstone turning point experience in people's lives. So I invite you to learn more about that at mindfulmamamentor.com/group coaching. And now come with me to the table as I talk to Oren Sofer about my crazy silent meditation retreat. Oren, thanks so much for coming back on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Hunter.
So soon. And of course, I asked you back on because we were just on retreat together in Barre, Mass, at the Lovingkindness meditation, insight meditation retreat with Sharon Salzberg was there, and Greg and Winnie and other people. It was my first silent meditation retreat, and I had trepidation going into it. So I've invited you back on here to come talk about that retreat with me, which you were a teacher.
Yeah. It's great that you had the opportunity to do it. And I'm really curious to hear about your experience, all the different components of being in silence for 7 days, being away from your kids, and the loving kindness practice, which, as you know, is a very, very powerful practice and not always easy. You know, we have these ideas about going on retreat and practicing loving kindness, and it sounds so great. And then we get in there and it can be challenging. So I'm happy to be here and talk about it, and kind of a reverse interview a little bit, which will be fun. I get to ask you questions.
Yeah, a little reverse interview. Yeah, so I definitely had some trepidation going into it. To give you some background, I'd done a fair bit of traveling this spring. In April, I did my own retreat in Costa Rica. And then the week after that, I went to a conference for like 4 days. So I'd kind of been away from my family for a little bit. So I was feeling a little bit guilty and a little bit like not, like, okay, here we go. I'm doing this, but not totally gung-ho, I suppose, going into this, which I imagine a lot of people are. I don't know how people feel going into this kind of thing, but that's how I felt anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were the first few days of the retreat like for you? Having never been on a silent retreat before, it's often quite an adjustment to be in silence with no reading, no writing, no cell phone, no conversation other than the instructions we give in the mornings and the talks we give in the evening. And then that one, meeting we have in the small group to talk about how it's going. How was that for you?
Well, I knew the cell phone thing because I do my own business online would be hard. So I gave my cell phone over to the office when I first got there that first night. And and said goodbye to my mom, who gave me a ride there. And I was already like a little sad. But then the first day was really, really hard for me. Felt profoundly sad. Just missed my family a lot. I had been on other retreats before, but it was always with my children, Blue Cliff Monastery and the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, and always there had been children there. So while I'd get this, there would always be this sort of, maybe moments of silence technically, but there were children, so there was really no moments of silence. There were some, right? But not, as much as you would want. But I brought my drawings, Oren, because I gave that first day, I was so sad. I just cried as soon as everyone dropped their cell phones off. I just sat on my cushion and cried.
I remember seeing the tears come down, and
it was really sad that first day. I finally, after the end of everything on the first day, I came back and I brought it with you. I'll show you guys, the listener. I'll post these pictures if you want to see them. But this is my drawing of day one of the retreat. And it's a self-portrait for the listener of me crying.
This is not good advertising for meditation retreat. It's a picture of Hunter with a very sad face and tears streaming down. So say more about what those tears were, because I know that I was very curious. Tears can come from a lot of different places, and what was going on for you inside as you entered the silence and had that kind of swell of emotion coming up.
I think probably part of it, I was afraid to be alone, so alone.
Mm.
As a podcaster, right? I like to talk to people. I like to connect with people. I like to talk. And I think I felt really cut off. I guess I had been my life is so connected in a way, like always can be connected in any moment to everything I do. And then I was completely cut off. Like I kind of felt like I was like adrift. And I felt just this feeling like I felt like I couldn't contact my family. And that was just felt so sad for me, my children and just, I guess it was just feeling, it was the loneliness, I think. And I guess just feeling like, oh, here I am with all these strangers and I can't talk to anyone at all. And it was very lonely for me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot in what you said that I kind of want to dig into. It can be really lonely, and it's fascinating how even for those of us who do spend a lot of time alone, and I work from home, my partner's out working at the hospital during the day, and so I spend a lot of time, quote, alone. But even when we're alone, it's a very different experience than the kind of solitude that being on a meditation retreat invites, because of the context, right? Having all of our distractions and self-soothing devices and removed or relinquishing those, it really puts us in a very kind of naked place, that we're alone with ourselves in a way that for many people, we haven't been maybe in a long time, like maybe since we were kids. And so it can be this big shock to the system to all of a sudden just be there. And then it's fascinating how those connections with the people that we love kind of can rush in so powerfully, right? And we feel both the absence, but also the care and the intensity of the connection and the love.
Yeah. Yeah. That describes it, I think, really well. Just this intense feeling of like, oh, I just love you so much, right? Like to my family, right?
Yeah. So let's kind of look at the other side then of two other questions, and maybe we take them one at a time, which is, so the silence and the solitude is obviously there for a reason. And for the listeners out there who've never been on a retreat, it can kind of sound like torture. Like, wow, that sounds awful. Like I can't read, I can't talk to anyone, I can't look at the news. Why would anyone subject themselves to that? So obviously,
those were thoughts going through my head day one.
It's there for a reason. And so I'm curious for you, I can obviously talk about it. It's what I do for a living. But for you, what were some of the unexpected gifts or outcomes of having spent a week like that in silence, both on the retreat, but then also when you went back home?
Yeah. So it was after that day, after talking to you in the small group, after sharing like kind of my sadness, then I was able to say, okay, I'm here. I'm staying here. I'm not going to plot my escape anymore. And the gifts were profound. I really slowed down in a way that I'm not sure I have slowed down in a long time. And I'm able to slow myself down a lot, but I think my father said it best. Because I was kind of talking to him about it. He said, "You're kind of like an elderly person." I said, "Yeah, I kind of feel like an elderly person. Like I'm just happy to sit on a bench and just watch things go by." And it was really interesting. Like the first day, I remember walking through this hallway to where my room was and saying, "Oh, what a pretty space." This connector space with plants there. And then like by one of the last days, I spent 20 minutes in this connector space, like just looking at the plants and enjoying, like looking at all the different details of them and looking at the light and looking out the window and just perfectly content to be there. So there really, I mean, it sounds a little cliche, but there what really was like definitely a great sense of peace that I had, of just there was nothing I needed to do. There was nowhere I needed to go. And I wasn't restless. I was able to be there and just enjoy that space. I wasn't planning what I was going to be doing next. I wasn't judging myself. I mean, it really was very quiet and very peaceful. I really did notice the contents of my mind, which was really interesting. My brain is like a radio station. It really plays.
You're not the only one.
Oh my God. It's like song after song after song. Anything you guys would say, a song would pop up. My brain plays songs all day long. It was fascinating to see that.
One of my meditation teachers talks about who's a monastic. He's been a Buddhist renunciate for as long as I've been alive, actually, 41 years. And he talks about the first sort of 6 months of being a monk, and he was doing a lot of solo silent meditation practice, and just hours and hours of all of the songs he had ever listened to as a kid kind of running through his mind. So it's a common phenomenon. But you speak about the contentment that can arise, and this is one of the purposes of the silence, is to actually recognize that this reflexive habit, this compulsive habit that we have to always reach for something else to fill the moments of our life, to always be seeking something to do, something to read, something to eat, something to watch, anything to avoid just being with ourselves or with the moment. What we see and what we experience in a silent retreat is often first that initial shock of the withdrawal, actually, from sensory stimulation. And that can come with loneliness. It can also come with intense restlessness. It can come with fear. It can come with frustration. There's all sorts of strong emotions that can come up in this kind of a detox period, really, for the mind. But what we find often on the other side is, as you say, is that there's a kind of more abiding sense of well-being and fulfillment that comes not from consuming anything, but just from being, just from relaxing and appreciating the gift of being alive. And it's powerful for me always to reflect on and speak about that when we look around the world today and we look at what's happening to the planet and how our ecosystems and resources are being destroyed and devoured based on this rapacious hunger for entertainment and stimulation and pleasure and consumption. And one of the kind of gifts and sort of hidden jewels of contemplative practice is that we don't need any of that to be happy. Mm-hmm. That there's something else that we can touch inside that's self-sustaining, and that's actually much more rewarding than any experience we can have through consuming something.
Yeah. It really was lovely to be able to, just be able to enjoy the experience of walking, enjoy, I'm not sure I found great enjoyment in my meditation. I'm not sure I ever am but but especially and certainly enjoying eating, and just for me, the natural world and the visual experience. I mean, I'm a very visual person, so that was just being able to appreciate all of those things. So part of what I did later in the retreat is I did drawings. I finally realized I was I give myself permission to draw, because even if I can't write, drawing is life drawing is a mindful activity. You're mindfully observing. So this was my favorite tree. And I drew on napkins, which was sort of a self-limiting factor. And I drew leaves. I'm showing Oren my pictures now. I'll post it for you, dear listener, and my Buddhas.
Oh, lovely.
And some more leaves and one last Buddha. That was it. But anyway, and it was interesting to me, actually, as a artist to see that. And I didn't even, after a while, I thought, oh, okay. Like that second day, I was like, oh, I went into this mode of like, I'm going to take care of myself. And I gave myself permission to draw. But then it was interesting, by the last day, I didn't even need to, like, I didn't feel any need to draw. I just felt just to observe was enough. Just to be there was enough. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the meditation practice, and maybe I can say a few words about loving kindness practice for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with it, and we can hear a little bit about your experience of doing it in this sort of intensive way that we practice it on the retreat. So loving kindness meditation is an ancient practice. It comes from the Buddhist tradition. It's 2,600 years old. We have records of the Buddha actually teaching this practice to his followers and monastics in ancient India, encouraging them to abide with a heart of kindness and well-wishing towards all living creatures in this very radiant, expansive way of sort of opening the heart and resting with the wish for the well-being, happiness, and safety of all living creatures, which is really beautiful vision. And so in the technique that developed over the centuries, this quality is cultivated through the repetition of simple phrases like, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. Those are some of the traditional ones. And the practice is done by thinking of a person in one's life, visualizing them in the mind, connecting with the sincere intention for their happiness and well-being, and then silently repeating these phrases. And so the progression of the practice is basically meditating all day on these phrases with the image and moving through different categories of people and other living beings, offering this wish and this kindness, starting with people who were close to, for whom it's very easy to share these wishes, and working up towards more challenging people in our lives, and eventually sharing it with all beings and living creatures everywhere. So it sounds great. And then obviously the reality of the practice can be very different, because we encounter all sorts of other things in our mind in doing it, which is part of the point. So do you want to share a little bit about what your experience was of doing the practice intensively?
Sure. Yeah. So for the first day, as Oren said, it was loving kindness either for oneself or a benefactor, if that was easy, like somebody who you just think of and you smile, And I'm okay. I'm good offering loving kindness to myself. I've been practicing loving kindness for a long time, but not quite in this way. And so that felt fine. It felt good to do that. The interesting thing was just doing it for the duration of time that I had not experienced it. We did something like 4 hours of sitting meditation a day, along with walking meditation every day. And to practice, I guess it was an intensive concentration practice. And I would kind of go through waves. Like I would have waves of like, particularly when we were guided in the morning, I could really sort of drop in, and it felt, there was like it was lovely. It felt wonderful to kind of open my heart to this loving kindness. And then other times it was just felt rote, and it just felt like I'm just saying some words, and it just, I don't know, it kind of felt like a little repetitious. But I took it into, I did a yoga practice, and I took it into that, and I really enjoyed that. As we kind of moved through the days, the first several days were good. It was easy to offer loving kindness to a dear friend. It was kind of fun to offer loving kindness to the neutral person. I just kind of, peeked behind me, and I was like, oh yeah, her. I haven't seen her very much, or formed some opinion about her. So I'll pick her. And she was my neutral person, and that was fun. And then it was interesting with the Yeah.
And I'll just say a few words about what you mean by the neutral person for
Okay.
anyone who's listening and doesn't know. So as one kind of progresses through these categories, the idea here is that we're expanding a circle of affection. So usually we think about being kind and loving towards those we know, those we care for, those we're close to. And the aim of the practice is actually to slowly experiment with what's it like to dissolve those boundaries that I care about you and I don't care about you, and you're worth my love and you're not worth my love.
Mm.
And to run this experiment of what would it be like to actually have a heart of goodwill and kindness towards anyone and everyone. And so in the trajectory of the practice and the progression, as we move from people who are very dear and close to us, we move on to someone who we don't have strong feelings for either way, who's called the neutral person. This is someone who's a stranger, who we don't care for one way or another. And it's a very interesting area to explore. What is it like to wish someone well who we don't know? And this category of the neutral person is a critical shift in the practice, because there are approximately 7 billion neutral people for each of us in this world who we don't know and we've never met and we may never meet. And so what's it like to consider this person's humanity, to recognize that this person wants to be happy just like me? This person has dreams and hopes and fears just like me. And what is the effect on our heart of beginning to extend the circle of affection to include those that we normally overlook? And then that becomes sort of the doorway to actually beginning to explore where I assume you were going next, which is those we have difficulties with, or in the traditional text called the enemy, the person who we struggle with, and exploring what it's like to have kindness for them. So I'll let you pick it up from there.
Yeah. So the difficult person, much to my mom's surprise, was not my dad, but I love you, Dad, but was someone who was actually a dear friend for a long time, and for reasons unknown to me, stopped kind of contacting me. And I felt very hurt by that for a long time. And, I can still feel, that sensation of that care and that sensation in my heart, as I speak about it. But I took this person and I wished this person loving kindness. And that whole idea of looking at this person and saying, okay, just like I want to be, even though I had been, for a long time, I'd been hurt and just, a little bit of, I guess the word is animosity, but that's a little too strong, I guess, would come up from, but just recognizing, oh, this person wants to be happy, just like I want to be happy. This person wants to be safe, just like I want to be safe. And so it was hard. It was challenging to wish loving kindness to this difficult first person for a little bit, but then it really did work. I suppose there's success over the course of the day. I feel like I sort of healed that wound in some way over this difficult person. I don't feel, I'm like, well, I don't know what was going on for you, but I hope you're safe. I hope you're happy, etc. Which that was really gratifying for me. It made me feel good to be able to let go of that and to,
wonderful.
Kind of forgive in that way,
Yeah. And it's important to name here, whenever we talk about this sort of thing, that, wishing well to someone who has, the people that we have difficulty with in our lives are often places where we've experienced pain, or in some cases, maybe where someone has harmed us in some way, verbally, emotionally, sometimes even physically. And so it's really important to recognize that this is in no way suggesting that we condone that behavior. It's more looking at what is the effect on our own heart of harboring ill will. And you used that word animosity, right? We get to see the impact of those energies and mind states on our own well-being. And that when we hold on to bitterness or hatred or resentment, we're the first ones to suffer. That those states are actually damaging to our own well-being. And so the practice is first and foremost to free and heal our own heart. And that there's a difference between wishing someone well and agreeing with or condoning their actions, and that we can separate those. So it's a very rich terrain to explore. And I'm glad to hear. It sounded like you chose someone who was kind of just in the right zone. And this is one of the things that we talk about, as you know, on the retreat, when we get to that level of working with the, quote, difficult person, to not start with the most difficult, challenging person in our life, but to start with someone who's kind of difficult, but where there's that possibility of really finding some traction and working with it. So I'm happy to hear that you chose someone that there was enough to work with, but not so much that you got overwhelmed, and that you're able to sense the possibility of the transformation and the healing, because that then becomes a template in the mind. As soon as we have that experience of shifting from the sense of separation and aggression or ill will towards someone to a different way of relating that says, well, whatever happened, wherever you were coming from, just may you be at peace, may you be well. That then becomes possible for other relationships. The heart sort of starts to learn, oh yeah, I can do that. I can shift out of those tight places into something that's more spacious and at ease and beautiful, really, in my relationships.
Yeah. What you practice grows stronger. That's exciting for me. I like that idea. Yeah. And it felt like for me, just like, it's like, I'm free of that thing now.
Not
it's
carrying
like,
that around anymore.
Yeah. And that was lovely. And then the day after that we did, and it's funny, like it was 7 days, but I have to say the feels like, even as on the drive home, I was like, wow, that went by fast. It felt oddly enough. But anyway, the last day we wished loving kindness towards all beings. And there was a wonderful meditation that Greg led us through, where we divided our sort of zone of awareness into quadrants and wished loving kindness in this one quadrant to all the beings in that area, including all the people behind you in the hall, including all the animals in the forest, including the trees in the forest, the people in the offices, the beings that fly, the beings that are insects, the beings that are in the water, just kind of picking and describing all of the beings that you can imagine, which really helps you to get a sense of the vastness and of all of them. And that was wonderful. I really enjoyed that a lot. I felt very filled up with loving kindness in that day. And it helped that it was this gorgeous day out, and we could, see there were all these bees and like crabapple trees in the front. And but then that day I went for a run every day in this 3-mile loop on the street. And I went for my run that day, and I was like feeling great. As the sun went down, I passed this farmhouse that has goats, and I was like, hi, baby goats. They're so cute. And I'm feeling, may all beings be at peace, happy and healthy. And then I get around the corner to the pond, and the pond was so beautiful that it struck me with this like really profound grief for what we're doing to our planet. Just like I just felt, I can feel it now a little bit, like just that, I couldn't believe what we're doing, how we're harming so many beings in our planet, how we're harming ourselves, how we're harming the beauty of this world. It was just so, it was like a huge grief, and I just cried on the ponds of the rocks. And then I eventually, came back to the retreat center. And it was interesting. After that, I kind of had to go back to wishing loving kindness for myself, and it was so perfect, Oren, because that night you spoke about equanimity. And
Mhm.
your whole talk, it was like spoke exactly to me. Like you spoke about like the quavering of the heart or something like that. And then equanimity. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what
Mhm.
I need right now. Exactly what I needed at that moment.
Mm.
I felt so sort of raw and open and,
Mhm.
connected to everything.
Mm.
So I don't know if you could remember what you spoke to, but maybe you could share a
Mm.
little bit of what you said that night.
Yeah. Um, it's a lot. When the heart opens, we don't just open to the beautiful, lovely things. We open to the sorrow and the loss and the pain and the grief as well. And that's just part of the nature of things, that we can't just pick and choose. I want the good stuff and not the bad stuff. That life includes all of it. And so, equanimity is this kind of balance in the heart that has the space to be with the whole range of our experience, the joy and the sorrow, the pleasure and the pain, the success and the failure, the gain and the loss. And it comes from the understanding that this is the truth of things, that no one escapes without getting a good dose of the difficulties, and that we can look at people and think, oh, they've got it all, but we never know. And that the reality is that hardship follows success just as surely as the out breath follows the in breath. And so equanimity is this very, very, very powerful quality that develops through contemplative practice slowly over time. And it's one of these four um, um, qualities that we can cultivate, loving kindness being the first, and then compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity being the other three. And so on that last night, I spoke, as Hunter was saying, about this quality of equanimity, what it is, what it isn't, and how to actually cultivate it. I was just checking online. It looks like they haven't published it yet, but it will be available for folks to listen to on my SoundCloud account, and probably by the time your episode airs. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So if we'll link it up in the show
Mhm.
notes, if that's okay with you, Oren, that'd be
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, it was a great talk. So you guys, you can listen to it too. Just go to mindfulmamapodcast.com, and this will be episode 171. I actually know when this one's coming out. So we'll put Oren's talk in there. Yeah, kind of by that day, it was interesting. I was like a little excited to go home, but I was like, I felt so peaceful. I felt so relaxed. I wasn't quite ready to go back to my cell phone yet. Not sure
Yeah.
I wanted my cell phone back.
It's great, isn't it, to actually feel that, like, oh, I don't actually want to look at that thing. I appreciate the experience of being alive on its own.
Yeah, it was funny because my mom drove me home back to her house, and then I flew back to Delaware from there the next day. But she drove me back then the next day, and so we're in the car, and wow, in the car, the world is going by so fast in this beautiful countryside in Western Mass. I'm like, oh, it's
Mhm.
beautiful. And mom says to me, so don't you think you should turn on your phone and tell Bill you're alive? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I should. And so I turn on my phone and I call my husband, and I'm talking to him, and it felt so strange to
Mm.
have watch my attention both be on the phone and then also go out to the landscape
Mhm.
and kind of see my attention move back and forth. And I had said, this is kind of hard to talk on the phone with you right now while I'm
Mhm.
also driving in the car, which as a passenger in the car is, is a pretty normal thing to do. But
Mhm.
it felt
Mhm.
so, yeah, it was a little strange and challenging. I kind of wanted to just put down the phone and just look out
Mhm.
the window.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating to see the way our experience of life can change. And I think it's important for me to connect what you're describing to the point of these practices, because we can go on a meditation retreat for a weekend or a week or longer and have all kinds of experiences that are different, right? Where our perceptions get altered, our experience of time changes, our experience of our body changes, our experience of our heart or our mind, and there can be these shifts in perception and experience that are fascinating and novel, but that aren't the point in and of themselves, and that the point is to start to actually see more clearly, one, the richness and the complexity of being alive. And we start to actually recognize that when the qualities of mindfulness and concentration and loving kindness are not strengthened, that we're actually experiencing a very narrow slice of what it is to be alive. And that a lot of the time we're living through the world of our thoughts and really only tasting just the tip of the iceberg of the full experience of being in a body and conscious. And again, I think this is something that we all know. You don't have to go on a meditation retreat to experience that. We all have moments where we feel more open-hearted and connected and deeply alive. But what we learn on a meditation retreat is that those don't need to be random. That we can actually cultivate these mental capacities of mindfulness, concentration, kindness, equanimity, patience, all of these very healthy, healing qualities that open us to the full experience of being alive. So this is one aspect of it. And then the second aspect is we start to actually learn how the mind functions. We start to see how the ways in which we think and perceive construct our world. Mm-hmm. And the experience of noticing, there's all of this happening. There's the sound of my husband's voice. There's the phone that I'm holding. There's the image of him back in Delaware. There's the visual field in the car. This is all very ordinary, but part of what's happening is that the mind is taking in more deeply the actual moment-to-moment experience of being alive. And when we're doing that, we can also start to see how we begin to interpret and make stories about our experience. So it sounds like perhaps that conversation with your husband was rather, ordinary and easeful. But it's not always the case, as we both know. And someone says something or something happens that stimulates us in some way. And then when we're not actually fully present and aware, the mind can start to create a whole story about what's happening and begin to add all sorts of layers of pain and suffering and resistance and animosity and confusion to just one statement, something someone says, right? Like, your retreat ended a while ago, you didn't call, and perhaps instead of just recognizing maybe they're confused or they want to know what happened, we start adding layers of interpretation of, it's not okay for me to have my own life, or I don't have any freedom, or you're trying to control me, and this whole sort of world. So the clarity of awareness that develops on retreat also helps us to unhook from the ways that we add unnecessary complexity and suffering to our own life and to others when we see more clearly what's actually happening.
Yeah, that's true. I think what I noticed most coming back was what I really saw was I saw the suffering of so many, everybody else's suffering. Like I saw, just everyday actions like this like, I don't know, someone smoking a cigarette, right? It's like, oh, this is like this thing you're doing to not suffer so much. And then it was interesting for me. So that afternoon, I say, okay, sit down to my computer, and I'm mindfully checking my email and checking my messages. And I actually got this message from a friend, a person that I was friendly with in high school, that my ex-boyfriend from high school, from when I was 15 and 16, we'd gone out for like almost 2 years or something like that. It was a very prominent time in one's life in that time. And that he had 2 days earlier, he had died of an overdose. And so it was like, whoa, just hit with this intensity of this, somebody who had been someone who was, in my life at a certain time, was incredibly close to me, to see that he had that much suffering, and that's what happened, and it just was, it was such an extreme swing, right? To go from one day of this like peaceful contemplation of the crabapple smell to move to that the very next day. It was really, really profound in some way.
Yeah. And how did your heart handle that? What was it like, your capacity to both feel the intensity of it fully and also, absorb it, or like what was the experience like for you?
Well, I think I remember feeling like when I got home, like my whole heart area, like literally physically the area of my chest from shoulder to shoulder felt open, and it felt almost in a way like raw, but raw is a bad word for it because it has these negative connotations. It just open in a way.
Yeah.
And so I felt that very much, but it felt incredibly poignant and didn't bowl me over. I guess I had in some ways some of that equanimity, right? Like I wasn't overwhelmed by it. I could just feel that feeling of wow, just
yeah. And that's the one of the fruits of practice, is that we feel things more fully and deeply, and there's more resilience. They don't knock us down, right? And that's the fear, is that, well, if I open my heart, then that means I will become overwhelmed, right? I'll feel everything and I won't be able to function. And what we find is it's actually quite opposite. The opposite is that the practice grows in this way, that we feel things more, and our capacity to hold that also grows simultaneously. And then that the experience of life is richer. We can feel the care and the heartbreak simultaneously, and there's a sense of space within which to hold it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's how it felt for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Despite my heartbreakingly sad drawings from the first day, I feel like I'm very enriched by the whole experience. It's interesting. For me, I've been practicing meditation for 14 years now. So it wasn't like the meditation part wasn't sort of the shock and awe part. The shock and awe part was just the disconnection, I think, for me. Thinking about it, I would really certainly recommend that people try a retreat, but maybe try like a 3-day
yeah,
retreat before you dive into this.
Ease your way in, for sure. Yeah.
I was, it was nice. It was nice that you were there, actually, even though we had only spoken on the podcast. I was like, oh, familiar face. At least we've had a conversation before. And having read your wonderful book, Say What You Mean, I was like, well, I like the way this person thinks.
I can trust this guy.
I guess he's
yeah.
And Sharon Salzberg was wonderful, just making everything so down to earth, so so grounded, it was, but that she was a wonderful presence. I'm glad that even though she was recovering from some illness, she was able to come in the afternoons, and I was really grateful for that.
Yeah.
So
Good.
what is it like from your experience as a teacher, though? You've gone on many of these retreats and you've taught many of these retreats. Just so briefly, I guess, like, what is it like as a teacher to be there with all these people having these, seeing me with tears running down my face or whatever?
Well, it's a very beautiful experience. And it's intense in its own way because, one is responsible for the emotional and psychological well-being of 100 people, on these larger retreats. So it's a lot of energy psychically to be plugged into. Everyone kind of going through each, you think about your own experience and then multiply that times 100.
I know.
So there's a certain intensity to guiding that experience for that many people. And it's also a great privilege and an honor. There's a beauty in supporting people to do that deep work of exploring their own mind and heart, and healing and awakening, opening up to what it is to be human. And each person's journey and path looks slightly different, and they're going through their own challenges and joys and boredoms, and people are going through real life stuff, whether it's someone's partner with a diagnosis at home, or someone with real challenging situation with work, or a legal battle that they're in the middle of. And so life doesn't stop just because you're on retreat, but there's a poignancy and a richness to bearing witness and getting to be part of people's life in that way. So I really enjoy it. It's one of the most rewarding things I do, really, is leading these retreats, because I really sense that they have a lasting impact on people. That it's an experience that for most people becomes some kind of a touchstone in their life, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. The places that we come to on these retreats, which are not always, happy places. It's not that it's all sweet and light, as but there's something about the rigor and the challenge of being with oneself and really learning to handle one's own heart and mind. There's a quality of dignity and resourcefulness and trust that comes out of that. And that's a great honor to get to be a part of that for people.
Well, thank you for doing that for me and for my 99 other friends who are on retreat that I don't know most of their names. And thank you also for bearing witness for us today here on the podcast. I really appreciate you doing
absolutely.
That. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thanks again for having me back. And good luck with the book when it's as it's in its phases of being born.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing it when it's done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. It was a pretty amazing experience. I'm so glad I got to share this with you and have Oren come on and share this with you with me, because I think he brought out so many of the deeper aspects. So I'm so grateful to Oren for coming onto this podcast with me. And I want you to hang on to the end of the episode because, during the retreat, we had chanting we had different chanting that was about loving kindness and things like that. And we had this one chant that we chanted during the retreat that was basically said in Sanskrit, like, may all beings have loving kindness. And it reminded me that there's a beautiful song that I use in my yoga classes that says these same words. And so I contacted the artist, Jane Winters, and she said that I could put the song at the end of the episode. So make sure you hang on for Jane's song and listen to that. And before we do, of course, if you have any questions, you can email me, hunter@mindfulmamamentor.com. You can join the conversation about this episode either in the private Facebook group or on my Instagram page. And you can find both of those at mindfulmamamentor.com. And I hope that you will check out the mindfulmamamentor.com/group coaching, the Mindful Mama Transformation coaching groups. And it's a 5-month group coaching program where you really get this sisterhood of positive peer support. You get lots and lots of one-on-one attention that really helps you go from get to a place of thriving. Like, we don't want you to just be surviving. We want you to be thriving. There is just this one precious life. You should not have to be just making it through the days. This is all we get. So let's make it count. Let's really be present for it. Let's be present for our kids and have the best relationships we can. And that's really what this group is about. So I invite you to learn more and schedule a call with me. We'll talk at mindfulmamamentor.com/group coaching. And now I'm wishing you a beautiful week. I'm wishing you peace. I'm wishing you some quiet and some stillness. And I'm so excited to leave you with this beautiful song from the Compassion album by Jane Winters. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
Samasta Sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino Samasta Sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino Loka samasta Samasta Sukhino Loka Samasta Sukhino Loka Samasta Sukhino Samasta Sukhino Loka 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 Samasta